Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Orr, and I'm the Executive Director of the UK and Ireland Spill Association. And I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar this afternoon, which is following a response and a remediation and everything else, which is a live incident. It's actually still working hard. People are working hard at the moment from ASP. Down there dealing with the spill. Now, the spill is complicated, and the reason that we're doing this is to try to unbundle a case study and really look at the different parts of it in some detail, with the opportunity to sort of discuss with Adrian Brennett from ASP Environmental, who is the poor guy who's got to deal with stand in the middle between the insured and the loss adjuster and deal with what is actually must be a very, very traumatic incident for the owners of this property. But also we have here Amy Pros who is from Socotec, who's actually, and what you're going to see in this is analytical support to these incidents is absolutely essential to making the right decisions, because those decisions fundamentally affect how you're going to deal with the response, how you're going to deal with that in working out where things have gone, how things have occurred, and actually building the story so that you can carry the affected party, the house owner, and you can just see by that picture on the screen, it is not a small house. It is a home. If you want to get passionate and you watch Grand Designs, you know how much a home means to a homeowner. And when a response occurs and shatters their beautiful home, it's a big emotional commitment. But as responders, our job is to stand there and deal with everything that comes in and make the right decisions on behalf of human health, animal health, the environment, groundwater, all the rest of it. So this is an incident which is unbundled, so we can all get a clearer understanding of that. So what are we? We are a trade association. We're the trade body for marine and inland response companies in the UK. We represent contractors, manufacturers, consultants, but importantly, we also have an accreditation activities, which we run through an independent company, International Spill Accreditation Scheme, under its own scheme for inland oil and chemical spills. And we also deliver marine accreditation to the Marine Coast Guard Agency standard for the accreditation of marine spill response organizations. Now, both organizations work closely with regulators and our members to produce best practice guidance. And in many respects, this webinar is a part of this. And ASP and many of the subcontractors they've employed to assist them in this incident are members of either UK and Ireland Spill Association or are accredited contractors under the International Spill Accreditation Scheme. Now, the thing I would point out is spills are changing, whereas for most of my working career, most of the spills I've been involved with have been hydrocarbon spills. But actually, as you know, when you fill your car up, the fuel you put in has got fatty acid methyl ester in it if it's diesel, or it's got ethanol in it if it's a petrol car. And you're going to see a greater increase in the number of chemicals which are being used for transportation, but are also being spilled. And our members get involved in foodstuff spills, sewage and slurry spills, debris, which goes into rivers and streams and lakes, plastic, sadly, but also more recently, lithium-ion battery fires. So the nature of spills and what our responders are expected to attend is changing. So what actually defines a spill? It's an unplanned release of a product that may be harmful to the environment, and it's often caused by the failure in containment, often operator error, could be an accident, like a vehicle accident, or a tree falling on a a tree in a storm falling on a fuel tank because of weather, or it could be vandalism, and we often see a lot of that. So what are the priorities when a spill occurs? And these will be at the back of the mind in any response that you do. Obviously, the ultimate priority is to protect human health, to protect livestock, animals, obviously to protect the environment, but then next to protect assets. And obviously what we're trying to do is, when we attend an incident, is we're trying to contain the spill as close to the source as possible. But once we've identified the extent to which it's spilled, to prevent it going any further, so it limits the damage which that can do. So what is essential in any incident? Well, really, we've got to know what product is lost. That's not always as easy as it seems, as we shall find out. And okay, until we know that, we don't know what the risks are from that product, and therefore how they're going to be managed. And obviously, depending on the product, but also depending on the environment in which it's spilled, we've got to identify what the possible receptors are: humans, animals, assets, and then we can design a mechanism by which they can be protected. Information is vital in the early stages of an incident. And obviously, sometimes they're not in a household, that sometimes they're not completely obvious, because the owner of the house doesn't know what happened before they bought their house and what has happened. So information like drainage plans, detailed maps, or surrounding area maps, local knowledge. Neighbours may know more about the property than the owner themselves because they've lived next to it for many, many years. Utility drawings are obviously vital. And all of these, you need resources, but also it takes time to get the right resources to the right place to do the right job. And that always needs to be planned. So responders need a toolbox of skills, and they need the right equipment. And in any company that is accredited, we would expect training to be keeping responders up to date with equipment, techniques, risk assessments, and handling handling spills of new products or new risks. Keeping equipment up to date and suitable to the emerging risks, e.g. new fuels, which represent a different hazard. And of course, up to date with what the legislative requirement and regulation are. And land contamination risk management is the best practice standard that we have to follow. And it is evolving. And we've seen changes to RPS 215 recently, and it is really incumbent on the contractor to keep up to date with the changes of legislation. And obviously the way that waste is managed from these incidents is also changing and evolving. And ultimately, the responder on the site is the producer of that waste. And he's got to work out where that waste can go, because they are responsible for that waste when they sign that consignment note. And they have to be absolutely certain that it's going through to the right waste stream, but also the site to which it's eventually being consigned is allowed to accept that waste. So there's quite a burden of responsibility on the contractor. Anyway, enough of that. I'm really keen to start to hear the story. And the way we're going to do this, it's going to be a bit of a conversation, because I'm burning to ask loads of questions about this, because apparently there's fish involved, there's things involved, there's drives involved, there's a posh house, and oh my God. Anyway, it all sounds quite exciting. So to tell the story, I'm going to Adrian from ASP, and Amy will then talk about the science of spills. My God. Mind you, if you look at all the letters after Adrian's name, he's a bit of a boffin too.
Boffin.
I can imagine when you have a couple of pints, you can have there must be a few war stories behind all those letters behind his name. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to hand over to Adrian and Amy, but I won't keep quiet. That's not in my DNA.
So yeah, no.
Well, thanks, Mark. So while I just get this up, yeah, just give me a whiteboard any day, and I'm happy. So yeah, so yeah, so thanks, Mark. And I would say that actually, yeah, you teed us up quite nicely there, which is quite nice. So as I think you've done the big introductions, I guess just a summary from me. I've been working in contaminated land remediation and building remediation for 20 plus years. And so I do find it quite interesting. Every new job for me is like a detective story and trying to work out what's happened and how best to deal with it. So I have to admit, I'm a bit of a sad person in that regard. I quite like understanding all of these things, and so it is for me, this is the dream job. So thanks again for kind of bringing us into it. But Amy?
Yeah, so I'm the technical associate at Socotec, and I've got over 25 years of analytical chemistry experience, both in the US and the UK. And I'm similar to Adrian. I have a passion, but my passion is chemistry.
Yeah, so you put the two together, it gets a bit crazy. So apologies. We'll see how we go. So what we wanted was this conversation. Yeah, so chip in whenever you want, Mark.
Yes.
But we thought we'd try and break it down because it is a project that's evolved and try and capture the ups and downs and the twists and turns a little bit. So we broke it down into 3 episodes, and this is episode 1. And then we're going to have a final wrap up presentation at the conference, which we will then tie together into a final episode that we'll put out as well.
Lots of twists and turns.
Twists and turns. That's it. So I guess what we've tried to do, and I guess, Mark, you've teed this up absolutely spot on, which is the preparation. So preparation is all about the accreditation, the training, having the right people, and having the right equipment to be able to respond in how you need to respond, and then having the capacity to respond as well. If you haven't got that, you're not adequately prepared to respond. So that's all done before a loss even happens. That's just the background. So the detection and then the response, and kind of leading into a little bit of the mitigation, is pretty much where we're going to be covering in this first episode. So that's those first 3 steps. This is a pretty well established method globally. So prepare, detect, respond, recover, and restore. We've kind of adapted it and evolved it for our purposes and taken ownership of it, called the advanced spill process. But you got it.
Oh, that rhymes with ASP. I get it.
Funny that, isn't it?
So I'm just thinking, you're reinventing the wheel a bit.
Well, yeah, and when you've got a wheel, you've got to do something with it, haven't you?
Absolutely.
So there we go. So yeah, so we're going to do that, and then the next episode we'll carry on with the ongoing mitigation, monitoring, and recovery, and then the third episode moves into the restoration planning, and looking at, having identified what we need to do, how we go about dealing with that, and then deal with the information that continues to come in. So I guess episode 1, the initial response. So quite often, lots of stuff goes on before we even get involved. So in this instance, it's a really good example of that. There was a detection. The homeowner identified a smell of an oil odor, absolutely guaranteed, very confident it wasn't kerosene. It's not heating oil. I know what heating oil smells like. And then they basically, later on, so about 3 weeks after that initial odor, they had oil pouring out of the surface water manholes during an intense rainfall event. So obviously we know that oil floats on water. Yes. So we're reasonably confident it is an LNAPL, a light non-aqueous phase liquid. And so that's coming out of the manholes when it rains. So that's never a good place to be. So the owner really kind of started to increase their response at that point. They were kind of ticking along at a nice steady pace. They'd engaged a consultant to come in and take samples. They'd done sampling in the garden between the in the border between the brand new resin drive, cost a lot of money, and the house. No PID readings in there at all, no soil gas readings of any note, but all of the sample locations refused on a coarse aggregate that likely to be the backfill that had been gone in around the basement, essentially. So, but no indications of any vapors in and around outside of the house. So that was it. So obviously 3 weeks later, oil's pouring out of the drains near the koi carp pond. So you like your fish, Mark. So
we like the fish. Yeah.
Yep. So luckily enough, no significant pollution to the pond, to water quality.
So the fish were all right.
So the fish were all right. So that's it's good. But obviously, we're then instructed, and about a week later, and so we're then mobilized on site. So we, first thing we're doing is we need to protect these fish. So probably one of the first things that went down was some absorbents and some barriers around that manhole to make sure that if there was any further losses, the fish were safe. So we're responding, and we're responding doing three things, I guess, initially. So it's that site attendance, risk assessment, and stakeholder engagement. And these three things are kind of going on all the time in parallel, and it is more of a circle, but it all has to happen at the same time. And so as part of any urgent response, really. So
just in what is the hierarchy here? I mean, who are you reporting to? Are you reporting to the house owner, or are you reporting to the insurance company?
So we primarily work with insurers.
Yeah.
So we're reporting to normally loss adjusters, and we mainly work with Questgate's loss adjusting. Mm-hmm. So we're working primarily with them. We've got a really good working relationship, and we can respond accordingly because of that relationship. Mm. And so essentially then we're then feeding information back to insurers in light of the policy. So normally what they have is this first response is normally what they call a without prejudice response.
Yeah.
Get out there, investigate, mitigate your losses, stop it getting any worse, so that if the policy does respond, insurers have reduced the cost as much as possible. But, and that's that kind of initial response, really. And so at this point, we've got oil coming out of surface water drains, and we've got vapors in the property, reported to be in the property. So they're the two things that we've got to kind of respond to and work out where we are from there. But we're, as parallel of that, so whilst we're mobilizing to site, we're doing the checks on Magic Map, the Environment Agency Magic Map, and BGS. We're checking the geology. We've identified it's in a groundwater source protection zone 1, so it's quite a vulnerable location. Chalk underneath, used for drinking water abstractions, and so it's going to be very sensitive in that respect. And oil isn't generally a good bedfellow with chalk, so we want to, we're immediately going, well, how deep is the groundwater, and all of these sorts of aspects. And then we're looking at, we're just very much open-minded when we arrive to so that we can kind of make sure we've taken in the information and making the decisions and responding accordingly. So first thing we're doing is isolating all the fuel sources on site, making sure that there's no potential for ongoing losses in that regard. It was a lovely sunny day when we turned up, so there was no oil coming out of the drains at that moment in time. The homeowner was absolutely adamant, 100% confident that this wasn't a source that was coming from them. So they were, not that happy about isolating everything, because this wasn't their source of oil. So I think that's kind of a key first challenge. So we kind of managed that, and then got everything isolated. So we know that we haven't got any significant ongoing oil losses, essentially, which is good. At that point, we're immediately then shown a manhole, and we lift the manhole cover, and inside you can kind of see myself looking in there at a very shiny dark oil and it was quite a few centimeters thick in that manhole, and it's giving up quite a decent PID reading. So the PID reading is quite responsive, and so it's high, so it kind of indicates a very kind of low vapor threshold in that regard. But the look of it is, immediately I was thinking that's engine oil or something along those sorts of oils.
And there's so much of it as well.
There was quite a lot of it, yes.
Lots of it. Scary.
So exactly. And the property owner is pointing at a drain that comes into that chamber, which looks like it's coming from offsite, essentially, and saying oil's coming in here and it's going from here around all the surface water drainage. This is the source of it. It's not our problem. You need to go knocking on doors, basically. That was pretty much where it's at. So we said, well, we need to make sure we deal with it both in parallel. So we will go knocking on doors, but equally we're going to try and we just need to make sure that we've covered everything off here as well. So in parallel. So we then do the indoor air monitoring. We identify we have got vapors inside the house at significant levels. So we've got 10, 20 ppm in some of the rooms on the ground floor. So they're quite high.
Surely it must have been quite an uncomfortable environment for them.
It's a very nice property, and so this must have been very uncomfortable in that respect. The one positive thing is that they tend to close all the doors all the time. So from that perspective, there was very little movement from affected areas into unaffected areas. Yeah. So from that perspective, it was quite well contained to a couple of rooms actually. But it was, the kitchen, dining room, and main entrance.
So so you could smell it in general living rooms. Yeah.
So as soon as you walk in the door, basically. And so equally, they've got a basement area as well. So there was a couple of areas in the basement that were also quite high levels. So obviously, one of the things we're worried about is, we'll kind of repeating issues. We've got this hydrocarbon or LNAPL, which is giving off vapors. But we don't actually know what that is. So it's not got that much of an odor of kerosene. And so we're going to go, well, it's light, it kind of behaves as a liquid like it, but it's not, obviously it's not the right color. And it's not behaving, and it's not quite as odorous as kerosene is. So we're hedging our bets and taking a cautionary approach in that regard.
It almost looks like a very aged hydrocarbon of some sort.
Well, this is it, and we know that kerosene doesn't really age that badly. It tends to hold quite well. It's fairly insoluble and just kind of holds. So it's a bit. It was very much an interesting one, and one which was going right. Well, we can respond externally in the drains in terms of recovery and containment and everything along those lines in the same ways we would with any light non-aqueous phase liquid light oil. So we thought we'll respond in the way there, but the indoor vapor was just a bit of an area where we were a bit more concerned. So we needed to try and understand that
bit of a mystery.
quite quickly, I think. So, but either which way, the goal was we need to get the vapor levels down inside. So we were looking at, right, we need to do that. That's one of the ones. Obviously protecting the koi carp pond as well, absolutely. And then establishing the extent of the loss, if there is a loss on site, was kind of key. As I say, very much at this initial response site attendance stage, the property owner is of the view this isn't their problem.
Yeah.
So therefore, and also that it's contained to the surface water drainage. So it's nowhere else. It's just there. And so the nice new resin drive that had to be protected, and there was, that was pretty much a categoric. There was no way we were allowed to do any boreholes or any coring or anything beneath that drive.
Because that was just freshly put in.
So within the last couple of months, so fairly significant, really. So we had to recognize that, and I guess going back to your question, Mark, about insurers and that role, the key one is, so insurers haven't accepted liability yet; they haven't confirmed policy. So obviously nobody's wanting to damage a drive that will cost quite a bit to reinstate, even if it can be reinstated in sections. If they're not paying for it, essentially. Or maybe even if it doesn't need to be done. So it's about building that lines of evidence to say, do we definitely need to do that? Because only if we definitely need to do it will we do it. So it's quite a key one. So the stakeholders, we've obviously got the property owner who's been quite active and representatives engaged at the minute. They're inferring that there's this third party source that probably needs to come to the table at some point. Then we've got the loss adjusters who have obviously appointed us and introduced us to the situation on behalf of insurers. And then we've got the regulators, which, you know, given that the sensitivity of the site from a groundwater perspective is really important.
And what was their stance? Because obviously, I mean, you haven't got a lot of information you can say other than we're here attending it. And
I think that's probably a function of how busy everybody is in the regulatory world as well. In that respect, that quite often we give we give that information through, we get the reference number, and then we basically say, look, this is what we're doing. We're still investigating, still working out what it is, and then we just kind of get on with that aspect. And if the agency is concerned, then they'll obviously get actively engaged. Quite often they'll basically go, we understand where it's at, and they'll check in at a later date because they know that these things take time. And ultimately, as long as there's no abstraction that's immediately at risk, then they can afford to kind of wait back in the wings a little bit, essentially. We haven't had any active engagement to date.
But is your experience that it's very important to inform them up front and just keep telling them the story?
I think it's really important that you if we recognize that there's a risk to groundwater or to controlled waters, that they are made aware of that, so that they can take a position as early as possible. I think it's about that stakeholder engagement. It's about building trust, so we obviously work extensively with the agency all across East Anglia, but we don't work with every person. So you don't know whose desk is going to land on, and so you've got to build that trust every time, in reality, and maintain that trust with those individuals that you've built it up with in the past. So it is important, because ultimately down the line we're going to need to submit a report, and we want that report to be accepted. So it's important, really. But it's at this moment in time we were reasonably relaxed about it, because we were thinking, right, looking at the borehole logs, we should have a decent amount of clay, and so hopefully groundwater is protected. And we did communicate that in our initial response to the agency, to say, we believe that groundwater isn't at risk at this moment in time. If anything changes, we'll let you know.
Right.
So that initial, so then as part of the initial response, we're doing that initial risk assessment. So by this point, we've taken a sample of the oil from the water, and we're looking at it going, what is this? And as I say, we know it's a hydrocarbon. It's responding on the PID. It's giving off VOC levels. So we know that we're going to deal with it as an LNAPL and accordingly. But there wasn't that obvious kerosene odor, as kind of mentioned. But we know as well, whilst we're being told it's definitely not an on-site source, we're saying, right, well, let's just make sure. So where are your diesel generators? You've got a kerosene generator as well. And then you've got the property heating appliances. So let's go and have a look at those. Let's double check that everything is as it should be. We've not lost engine oil from, engine oil, which has then got mixed in with fuel oil, and that's got kind of discharged. So
lots of potential sources.
So we've definitely got enough potential sources that we need to rule them out before we can do anything else. And so we checked all the containment and all of the above ground appliances, and we were happy that they were fine, well maintained, and no issues, basically. So we're then thinking, right, we're going to need to do a drainage survey and work out where that drain comes from, that one that's potentially feeding oil into the drainage, and we're looking at pathways so we can kind of intercept those, and essentially so we're already kind of building in controls within the surface water drainage to stop it migrating from that initial point, and then allowing it to flow around and migrate basically. But we're also thinking about, if we have got oil underground, how is that going to, what are the other aspects that we need to worry about? So we've got a potable drinking water supply that runs through the potential area in close proximity to this manhole with oil in it. We've got an abstraction on site from the chalk that is used to irrigate all of the planted areas on the property. So if oil did get into the chalk on site and get into our borehole, then there is that risk of secondary contamination. We could, very quickly, we could have a big issue in terms of pumping oil all over the property through the irrigation system. So we needed to again, kind of identify anything that might make the situation worse, because we just need to say it's containment. Make sure the golden rule is don't make it worse. Whatever you do,
don't make it worse. Because you actually could make it worse through and actually become liable.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case.
Absolutely.
If you make a wrong decision, and that was an informed wrong decision, then I think all of the time there's this best endeavor, but that's why you have to have the right people. Making, both in terms of gathering the information and making the decisions, because otherwise, if the two things don't come together, as you say, you're going to make mistakes, and that's. So
your only protection at this point is probably your professional indemnity insurance, isn't it?
Yes, well, and our
your product liability insurance in a sense.
That kind of knowledge, and that's kind of not necessarily written down anywhere. That's kind of that experience really is kind of key. But I think the barrier, probably biggest barrier to entry into this sector is probably knowledge and experience. Money is important as well, but I think that knowledge and experience is probably the biggest one, because if you haven't got that and you try and respond to spills, that's you're going to make mistakes.
Absolutely, and they could threaten lives, but they could also threaten the environment too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very easy to imagine that that could happen. That's why accreditation is really important. So and that's what that gives really that confidence to it. So we're looking at both receptors in terms of the chalk aquifer, but equally potential pathways that might add to how that contamination could get to the surface.
And you've got lots of experience with chalk and oils, haven't you?
Chalk, unfortunately, too much of that really. But chalk's a challenge, and that's one of the key ones as well with the initial response. If you stop the contamination getting to the chalk, if at all possible, because it's virtually impossible to get it all back out.
Very, very difficult.
So that's really, really key. And I guess that's the other point to highlight at this point. So as I say, the homeowner's telling us that it's an off-site source. So, but we don't know how long that source has been coming onto the property. We don't know how extensive it is beneath the property. If it's a leak from our own oil distribution system on the property, we don't know how long that's been going on, and how significant that is either. So there's lots of unknowns in that respect, and obviously, whilst we're responding in a way which, with every response, on the basis that you've had a sudden catastrophic loss and you need to mitigate that loss and could get control of it as quickly as possible, the reality is that it could have been ongoing for many years, and actually, whether you're a bit slower in your response, it's not going to make much difference. But you don't know that, and you have to treat it as it's just happened.
You have to treat it as a catastrophic spill until you know otherwise.
And even then, you're only going to have the benefit of having dealt with it in the right way, really. So we've got the receptors. So you can see here on these images. So we've got the nice resin driveway, which
that is it.
That's it in the top right. And
before you guys got to it, right?
That's it doesn't look like that now. Unfortunately, but it will look like that. It might even look better than that when we're finished. So you can see on the just on the underneath that we've got live monitoring of what the vapor levels are in the property, so we're able to do continuous monitoring. We're getting, I think that might have been every 30 seconds monitoring at that point in time. We can,
and that's inside. How many rooms did you have to have put that in then?
So we just put that in the main room, main point where we felt the vapors were getting into the property at that point, and then we monitored from there, and so we then verified that with handheld monitoring through the floor to confirm that actually if we got a control on there and we were able to deal with that, then that was fine. But there was at a time we were contemplating putting multiple units in multiple rooms, but we never needed to do that, because we did manage to get, within 24 hours we managed to get the vapor levels down to kind of less than 0.2 ppm.
Okay. So in other words, it almost they weren't having a olfactory effect.
Yeah,
you couldn't really smell it.
No. So 0.3 is pretty much that threshold.
Yeah.
I always say that women are blessed or not in that they can smell to lower levels often, and so they will typically smell it below that, and then most blokes won't smell it at all, and so it is what it is. But at that sort of level, it wasn't causing them an issue inside, and so, but as a result, that gave them the remote monitoring basically gave them the confidence around that we were keeping an eye on it, and so that if anything changed, we would let them know and we would manage that appropriately. But equally gave them the confidence that actually the levels were at a level that were safe, and that kind of comes up later. That was one of their key: is it safe? Can I stay in my house? Type scenario, really.
It helps you as well having the remote data, because you don't have to go to the property so often, and you know what's going on.
Yeah, I think we pick that up in the next episode where we talk about the sustainability.
Don't reveal the next episode.
Amy, don't give any secrets.
We'll cover that off, but we do talk about some of the carbon savings that we've done in terms of approaches and things. So we try and put.
So what is all this trunking stuff? Is that part of the extraction, the vapor?
So that's vapor extraction. So we had 4 vapor extraction units pulling vapors from beneath the property, basically. So both from the basement airspace and equally from beneath the kitchen airspace, and because they had underfloor heating as well, and so there was some space. So getting all of those pulling through. As you can see on that picture, we're kind of pulling through sort of 49.7 ppm just on one unit alone, and that was pretty much consistent. So we were pulling out some fairly significant vapors from beneath, and that basically then it gave us the confidence that the vapors were coming in from a source external to the property, because once we were able to kind of get into the drainage, we were able to see that we had some fairly high levels in the drainage and in around backfill as well. So it was we got control of that pretty quickly, which was good. And as you say, kind of still able to maintain the footpath as well. So wasn't a huge interruption at that point in terms of the use of the front of the property. But I guess just go back. So the key bit though was, even at those low ppm levels for kerosene, that should be okay because it's not carcinogenic. We were concerned about the fact that we didn't really know what it was. So it was this dark oil, and it was just giving off vapors. So we very much immediately took a sample on day one and said, we need to understand what this is so we can understand what the hazard properties are, and then apply the right health screening values and assessment internally to make sure that, to be able to give that answer confidently to the homeowner, to say, yes, it is safe for you to stay in there, even at these low levels, because we understand the hazards and the risks associated with what you're breathing in, really.
And you, at that point, you have their health in your hand.
Yes, and it's it's a big responsibility, and again, it's that 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 making that decision is quite an important thing, and it does weigh on you to say, right, well, I need to know, I can make a decision, and we can do certain things, but we need to make sure that we're making the right decisions at the right time. And equally, if we need to change tack, we need to change tack, but we need the data and the information as quickly as possible to do that. So yeah, we were straight on the phone to Amy and saying, right, within probably about an hour on site, we're saying we will be sending you a sample by same day courier tomorrow. So we need to know what this is, basically.
Oh, no pressure then, Amy.
No pressure. So we collaborated with Adrian, and we used science to determine the nature of the dark spill, obviously on a fast turnaround.
Obviously.
Obviously.
Yeah, we got the information before we even asked for it.
Yes. And
we definitely wanted the information.
Yeah, I think I think that's not quite right. You wanted the information before you'd asked for it. Yes,
but it does help to have a good collaborative relationship with the client, so you know what's going on and why it's so important to get things done urgently. But as Adrian said, there were loads of sources on site, and one of them was kerosene. So I want to go through the background of kerosene because it'll be important, and I'll run through it throughout the presentation. So first thing to remember is what kerosene looks like. It's a pale yellow liquid, as shown here. And when you run it through a GCMS or GCFID, you get elution within the C8 to C16 range. Remember that, because I'm going to talk about it again. And it's got an intermediate volatility between the gasoline and diesel oil range. And this chromatogram shows it again. Again, the carbon range for kerosene is between C8 and C16. So these were the initial observations that we made on the dark spill. So this is what it looks like.
So that's what we sent you.
Yeah, that's what he sent me. He said that's what it looked like. And then he had some vials hanging around, so we compared it to kerosene. It's dark, but it doesn't look like kerosene. So it's not kerosene according to visual observations.
So then we got you some more vials.
Some more vials of different colored. That's what they have.
That's what we have.
In the wrong.
It's all part of
those ones on the window still, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, well, they're just over there, actually. Yeah.
No lie.
It's the training bundle.
Exactly. You're training.
It didn't look like any of these oils, but it did look like bitumen.
I was going to say it looked just like bitumen. Yeah.
Looked like bitumen.
Horrible stuff.
And then we were like, it looks like bitumen, but it didn't have the consistency of bitumen.
No, and I guess on site, I was thinking maybe it could easily have been, more of like an engine oil or a mixture of oils, and then mixed with a little bit of water as well. So it was, as I say, it had that very kind of fluid liquid to it, like kerosene, but very light. But it, as I say, it looked, everything about it said, engine oil or something much darker.
The way it looked like.
Yeah.
So and we also noted that it had a coating. It created a coating to the vial when we turned it upside down, which kerosene doesn't do.
No.
So then Adrian sent us the dark spill sample and the bitumen primer straight to the lab for analysis. So then we analyzed the dark spill sample, as we like to call it, because we like to be mysterious.
I like the idea that Amy had picked it up from the courier and went running through the lab with it straight to the GC. So it's like straight on there.
Straight on there, just for ASP.
Yeah. That was how I imagined it.
You treat them the same as every client, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, it works better when it's collaborative. So it went on the GCMS. We analyzed it, and interestingly, this is the total iron chromatograph of the sample. And interestingly, when we extracted the 57 iron, which we used to assess aliphatics, we could see that there were hydrocarbons within the range of C8 to C16. And as you recall on the kerosene slide I showed you earlier, that's where a reference chromatogram of kerosene will chromatograph, and you'll have peaks between the C8 and the C16 range. So this dark spill sample had peaks coming out between C8 and C16, and it looked like slightly evaporated kerosene. So there were a bit of early losses at the front end. So
you kind of came back to us at that point. I'll just interrupt, but
yeah, no,
and literally saying that pretty much you're saying, right, it is kerosene range.
yes.
So it could be that, but actually it might have an aged element to it.
Yeah.
And so we're like going, well, okay, so it might not be an ongoing loss. It might be an ongoing loss that has been ongoing for some time. So,
or it could be a third party loss, which has been around the property for a while.
Yeah, that which has taken time to migrate to us. Exactly that.
That heavy rainfall, which you talked about, which pushed stuff out the drains.
Yeah, and as we promised, there's a lot of twists and turns to this.
Yeah.
So it looks like kerosene chemically it's kerosene, but it's dark. So the mystery continues. And then we analyzed the bitumen primer control sample, and this is what it looked like. So
where did you get the bitumen primer from? Was this one of the ones on your windowsill?
It's one of the ones on our windowsill. So
he has these things.
We have these things. Yeah. So again, we thought, well, it looks like that. That is what it looks like. But obviously it's not that, because it's very different odor to it, essentially.
Yeah. And in labs, when we carry out this kind of analysis, we like to have the potential sources as well, because it helps identify.
Oh, you have them on your windowsill too then, Amy, do you?
Now I do. Yeah, so we analyzed the bitumen primer, and it actually looked different to the dark spill sample, and it was identified as a paraffinic solvent within the C8 to C12 range. Remember, kerosene goes until C16. And it also had heavy boiling range tar-like material.
So right color, wrong compound, basically.
Wait, it didn't chromatograph the same way.
Yeah, it's not
different patterns. And for us, all the peaks matter.
Yeah.
And then we extracted the 57 iron, which looked at the aliphatics. And again, you can see it's between C8 to C12. And then what we did was we blew up that part of the chromatogram. And this is what we found. When you blow it up, you can see further peaks, and they are the heavier compounds that are eluting at the later part of the chromatogram. So that's what you find in the bitumen primer. You've got that early paraffinic solvent, C8 to C12, and then you got your heavy boiling point tar-like material, which is quite heavy. So that's what it looks like.
Big reveal.
The big reveal. So then Adrian's like, but what?
Licorice. It's licorice. That's licorice in the top right-hand corner of your thing, isn't it?
It is licorice. And Adrian's like, what is it then? Why? What is it? So we because of this collaborative effort, and we knew the backstory a bit more as well, so we designed a special experiment for ASP. Yeah,
you did.
So we took the dark spill sample and we evaporated all the kerosene off until we ended up with a dark residue. So let's go through that. So the first chromatogram there is the bitumen control sample, as you can see, and it's got those peaks that finish eluting at C12. And then as I said, there's all these later heavier compounds coming up at the end. Number 2 is the dark spill sample as we received it, and that one looks like typical kerosene. And as you can see, it finishes off later at the C16 range. And number 3 is the dark spill residue of the evaporated sample. And as you can see, that one's got the later hydrocarbons in it.
And that's probably what we were seeing on the side of the glass as we turned it.
That's why it was sticky. That was why it's sticking to the side of the glass.
So then that shows that, it was kerosene, but it had some bitumen in it. And from talking to our chemists, they said it only takes a little bit of bitumen to give something a licorice color.
Hence the licorice.
Hence the licorice.
Hence the licorice. Okay.
Of the dark spill sample. which was in the
So it's a
end.
bit of an all sort. It's a bit of a licorice all sort then.
That's it. Yeah.
So in the
I'm
end,
sure of that one. That's it.
Yeah, that's patented.
so in the end, it was kerosene with bitumen.
Yeah.
We solved the mystery for Adrian.
We did, and I guess
And we designed a special experiment just for you.
I know. So it worked really well because in terms of us feeding that information back to our supply chain, in terms of them saying, well, it's obviously not kerosene because that isn't what kerosene looks like. We were able to have that full lines of evidence type approach to be able to say, well, no, this is what it is. And yes, it does have a small portion of kind of bitumen type compounds to it, but it's a small percentage of it, basically.
Yeah.
So from your tanker company, you were able to assure them that it was what it was.
We were able to assure them that it is what it was what it was, and that they could take it to where they were licensed to take it, and it could be treated when it's arrived without causing any issues to the treatment process.
Yeah, because up to then there would have been that doubt.
Yeah, no, and what we were doing on site was we were storing in secure IBCs any oils, any liquids covered, because until we can confirm what it is, both in terms of liquid and solid waste streams, we can't get rid of it. It can't move, because if it's hazardous, then it's under much more stringent waste transfer requirements, so consignment notes and everything else, and it has to be categorized before it moves. So it's really, really, really important. So we're getting this information back in, as it's coming off the detectors.
Yeah, I'm on the phone.
She's on the phone.
Guess what we found in the laboratory?
3 or 4 times a day she's phoning me.
Really, only 3 or 4 times a day. Is that all?
With exciting.
I must be doing something wrong. I think I was
exciting news.
today.
But it was really, but I say it was that collaborative approach, because in parallel we haven't stopped doing anything on site, so we're continuing to recover oil as it comes into the drainage. We identified a weak point where a surface water drain had been put into a manhole, but it hadn't been sealed. And so we were finding that was where oil was getting into the surface water drainage. So we were able to seal that up and prevent any further and re-secure the surface water drainage network, essentially. But equally, we were breaking down the oil transfer line as it moved underneath the property as well, to try and, we had pressure tested it and confirmed that the oil transfer line on the property had failed catastrophically, didn't hold any pressure at all. So it's 25 mil. So it's a lot of oil in there.
But hadn't the owner done that in his own investigations?
No, they recommended it, but it had never been done.
Okay. Yeah.
So again, because of that urgency aspect, and even after the oil or the dark spill material was identified in the drain, because the immediate conclusion was that it wasn't kerosene, even at that point, it wasn't done. Because that wasn't the it was that denial stage, really. And again, that's why it's important not to assume anything, and just to be able to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's from that initial stages, to make sure that when you get to the point where you're making decisions to going forward with an actual detailed proactive plan, having dealt with the initial response, that actually you're not going to get run over sideways when something that you should have checked, you didn't properly check out.
And also, as labs, it's important for us and interesting for us to know the backstory, because then we can help you on site.
So once, and I guess during that initial feedback, when the oil was the kerosene with a little bit of bitumen in it, or heavier end, we're immediately thinking, ooh, that could be, because by that point we'd received some of the design drawings, as built drawings for the building. So we're seeing, oh, it's got a bituthene 8000 design to prevent moisture and everything with the basement areas. So it's got quite a detailed design, but it's basically a bitumen based product. And so we're thinking, oh, does that mean that the kerosene has got into contact with that substance, and that's what's giving it? Which, if that's the case, then suddenly, you know, we could have a really big issue below ground in terms of that aspect. But once we'd identified, we'd broken down, and we'd literally got to the oil transfer line on one side of the drive, and on another side of the drive where it comes through, pressure tested it between those two locations. We were able to prove that the leak was between those two locations. So at that point, everybody accepted that there was no getting around this now. We needed to lift a section of the drive.
Oh no.
In order,
oh my God. But
let's have a look.
you had to destroy the drive.
So
Well,
we
the koi, by estate, are the koi carp still all right?
Koi carp are perfectly happy.
Oh, good.
Every time you walk past them, they come up to say hello. They're like the friendliest koi carp you've ever seen. They're really but once we went through that, we then came across it had a bitumen asphalt layer directly beneath the resin, which was very shiny.
Yeah.
So what we identified was that point where the drain hadn't been properly sealed to the manhole. When it rained, water was actually getting out as well as oil getting in. And what that was doing was lifting up the oil and pushing it up against the bitumen. So we then, that's possibly positive in that is probably where it's got the color from. Then it's just pushed up against that and got that. But when we lifted it, there was quite a lot of oil underneath. So that kind of takes you to the first picture, basation.
So it all starts to make sense now, doesn't it?
It does. But going back, so we now had both from the field work and the lab work, we had a really confident understanding. We confirmed that drain didn't actually flow into that manhole, but actually was an overflow to another soakaway away. So it was nothing to do with an offsite source. There was no other sources into it. So we were able to be confident on where the source was, that it had been stopped. We knew now what it was, why it was dark. We were able to further assess that in terms of to demonstrate that because it was a known kerosene spill, we were able to demonstrate it's not carcinogenic, it's not mutagenic. And therefore, from a waste classification perspective, WM3, we were able to show that it was non-haz, and everybody was able to move forward basically in that respect. So all of a sudden then we were able to confirm what the likely costs were going to be in terms of waste disposal, liquid and so that fast track process in terms of working out what was going on in terms of the source, there was an element of on-site that we carried on whilst Amy was carrying on in parallel. And then, as I say, information that we were finding on site and information that Amy was getting in the lab was coming together.
Through all the phone calls.
Through all the phone calls.
How many days since you've been on, how many days have you been on site by the time you sort of knew that?
I would have thought it was probably about 3 or 4 days by the time we got the results back. So in terms of, from day one, we gathered the sample, day 2, the sample got to the lab. And then by day 4, we had a pretty good example of where we were. Yeah.
That's good. That's quick.
Yeah. And
in
then
a way, that's quite quick because there must have been a couple of days where you're just scratching your head really and thinking, what could it be, and how can we eliminate it?
Yeah.
I think it's because we do carry out the testing unknown, so we've got chemists that are experienced in it.
Yeah. And I think it was, we were busy dealing with all the oil that was already in the drains, and that was still coming in at that point until we'd identified how it got in, how it was getting in. But once we'd sealed that, then suddenly, even when it rained, we didn't really have an oil problem. So from that perspective, we contained it at the point of loss at that point, which was quite good. But then we just carrying on with the investigations and delineation. So it started to move to a more planned process day to day until it evolved.
We're slowly migrating from response to mitigation in a sense.
Exactly that. So I guess another key bit is one of the things when we found old bitumen asphalt beneath the ground, there's always that risk on all the properties that this might have asbestos in it. So we did get Amy to rush through some asbestos analysis just to make sure that there wasn't anything.
Yeah, I was literally running around the labs.
Yeah, I guess it just highlights again, it's just that importance, highlighting that importance of, you just don't want anything to catch you out last minute. You know, make sure, do the groundwork, make sure we get it right. So luckily all of this kind of came back nice and clean, which is quite good. That then, once we knew the hazard properties of the source, we were then able to update our risk assessment. That's not the property, but, and then really kind of, you know, again, confirm that we didn't have an idea on what the lateral or vertical extent of the contamination was at this stage, but we knew that it kind of tied in with the conceptual model that we had water coming out into the subsurface, which then didn't soak away, but actually lifted the oil up. And when we went down, we did find that there was actually quite a stiff, low permeability clay at depth beneath this hard standing. So we're thinking, right, most of it is actually trapped within all the utility corridors, fiber optics, you know, all the backfill. That's really how the oil was migrating around. And so from that perspective, we still held with the view that the oil was being held up. And so actually the chalk wasn't, you know, continued to be at a low risk of contamination at that point.
Which is good.
And still at this point. So yeah, but we're still kind of keeping an eye on it, and everything needs to be removed or monitored as we go on, really. So
what a nice house. It's quite
a nice house. That's not the house, but it is a good reflection of a big house, which is
oh, that's not the house, but it is. But I mean, it's a 4-bedroom property with an extensive basement, a swimming pool, and spa,
and a fountain, Mark.
Oh, and a fountain. Yeah, well, we haven't mentioned the fountain.
No. So yeah, so it's a significant property, and I think that's probably where we'll leave it. But
I mean, the owners. I mean, was this their dream house? Sort of, was this sell business? This is my dream house, and I'm going to go and travel the world while having my lovely house. That sort of thing.
This is a house that's been, you know, 30 years in the evolution, and I guess, you know, I would say it was nearly done before we, you know, we arrived. The key bit is that we need to leave it in as good a condition, if not slightly better, when we leave it. So everything that, you know, that's always the thing that we have to put back and return the insurance, basically return the insured party back to a position they were prior to the loss event occurring. So
yeah, but you shattered their dream.
Oh,
well, as I say, this was the denial.
You have shattered their dream. You are
absolutely. Oh no, I'd be absolutely gutted. I mean, you do have to put yourself in their shoes a little bit in order to try and make sure that you stay grounded, because it'd be very easy, because we do this day in, day out, it would be very easy to just kind of rock up going, this is what we're doing, and everything else. There's stakeholder engagement is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and you've also got you're going to be there. This is now not going to be a 5-minute job. You're going to be there months, and and actually you're going to be very close to quite traumatized individuals in a sense.
Absolutely, and I think it's about, you have to bring people with you on the journey as well. It's a bit like a merger of businesses essentially, because you have to bring everybody's goals together. And at the same time as well, in order to be able to move forward. So, you know, one of the things we did do was, when we did break into the driveway, we had free oil visibly present beneath the surface. So we did take that opportunity to get everybody over and literally visually take it all in and smell it as well, just so that, you know, there is that acceptance of the fact that this is a big issue. And when we start to talk to you about, we're going to have to take more of this drive up, and just to try and say, build the building blocks of what we know the next story is going to be, but they're not necessarily ready to hear that yet.
Yeah. Be quite compassionate.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to go at the right pace, you know. So we obviously have a pace that we need to go to make sure things don't get worse.
Yeah.
And we keep things under control. You know, so one of the things, again, later on, you can't just lift up, once you identify you've got a lot of oil underneath there, free oil, you can't just lift that whole surface off in one go.
No.
Because all of that, when it rains, that's
Where's it going to go?
uncontrollable.
You're just going to spread it.
So you're already having to put into plans, right, how are we going? And so even though a lot of it was done through very nice weather, there was some intense rainfall events in that period. So you got to go, right, well, how do we need to prepare to be able to deal with that intense rainfall event if we had? So all of that's going into this risk assessment, essentially to say, right, it's constantly being updated to say, right, now, as we move forward, if we do whatever we do, again, golden rule, don't make it worse.
No.
If you have,
actually, and at this stage, you don't know when the endpoint is going to be. So handling the owners of the property, you can't share your end when you think it's how long it's going to this pain is going to last.
No, we don't know. And at this point, policy cover isn't necessarily being accepted either. So we're still,
they still could be liable for everything.
Yeah. So at this point, we're literally going, right, because all of a sudden, once we've confirmed what it is, the source, we've confirmed where it's come from, then you've got the evidence that you can give to insurers and the loss adjuster to make that decision, right? This is where it's come from. Is this now covered? And but part of that as well is most policies are there to protect built assets, and the utilities, soakaways, surface water drainage, septic tanks, clargesters, all of the things that go with that built asset. And so really most policies, it'll be that they're responding to, and not necessarily an environmental risk. So it's understand, it's just making sure that there was clarity, because particularly in the initial stages in this one, as we talked about, the main assumption that everybody had was that this is from an off-site source. It's not, so in essence, the insurers and the loss adjuster and the homeowner, their expectation is we're coming in to address an issue that is a symptom of somebody else's problem. And so we'll come in, we'll clean up all the surface water drains, and then somebody else will pay for this eventually. Not our client, the insurer, not our homeowner. So it's until you've identified the source, you've confirmed what that source is, and then you've confirmed policy coverage as a result, because you've confirmed the risk. So we've got vapors inside the house, we've got oil within the drainage, etc. And we've got it migrating towards the property, or it's within a meter of the house. So from that perspective, there is that immediate risk to the property. So our expectation at that point is that the policy cover is going to come through.
And has it?
Yes. So that's all being confirmed.
Okay, just to relieve that stress. I wouldn't like to leave the audience hanging there thinking these poor people,
deep breath. And I think that's and
they'll be joining the koi casting pond.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's the key bit with our relationship with Amy and the labs, and equally our other suppliers, essentially in that regard. It is a team effort, and it's a team effort back up with the loss adjuster as well at Questgates. Is that we were discussing on a daily basis with Richard as to where we're at, what we're finding, feeding back the information coming through from the labs, which again, you have to have that trust in that information, because if you're passing it straight through, giving an opinion on it, it's important that you trust.
You have to trust your chemists.
Yeah, I've got to trust.
Well, there is actually, and there's a big financial liability sitting somewhere at the moment. The owner doesn't know whether he's liable, whether he's going to be financially liable, whether an off-site party is going to be financially liable, and if it is his, is the insurance going to pay?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think
that's a big stress.
It's a big stress, and I think where again we try to minimize that delay that there might be with loss adjuster by making sure that they're informed in the process as we go, so that when we do drop that kind of confirmatory report on their desk, that they're expecting it. There's no shocks, and so from that perspective, it's a relatively easier review from their perspective, because they've already had an opportunity to look at the policy and see if we provide the report, the evidence along the lines we're saying, is the policy going to respond? They've already got the answer. We then give them the evidence. They go, right, okay, we're good to go. And then the decision and they've Richard at Questgate is very good at engaging with the insurers. So he's already prepped them. So everybody along the line is prepped to be able to keep the response going without any delays, which, a scenario like this, it's really important to keep, as I say, treat it like
if you took the guys off site because there was an indecision, I mean, that could destroy the confidence of the owners.
Well, this is it. And it goes on hold, and, some jobs do go on hold for different reasons, but, they go on hold. Sometimes that could go on hold for several weeks. As you say, that initial confidence and that initial relationship you've built, it can be
quite easily destroyed.
It can be a struggle to kind of build it back. And it's maintaining that, controls, you don't want to, having put all your hard effort into getting control of the situation, you don't want to then leave it and, have to potentially restart again when you go back. So stakeholder engagement, which we've pretty much talked to death.
Sorry, I jumped the gun. I didn't realize that. Sorry about that.
But I guess just to summarize, I guess, so the property owner, typically their main concern, and it was the same on this one, is obviously denial initially and anger as to who's done this to them. But ultimately, once they accepted that, it was, is it safe for them to stay in the property, and who's paying? Ultimately, the brokers, they want to make sure that they've done their job through the process. They've got the right policies in place. They've got the right coverage, because they don't want to be the one telling their client that, we've missed one. And then insurers, they're equally saying, have we been told everything we should have been told? And how much is this going to cost, essentially? So from very early on, insurers and loss adjusters are looking to say, right, confirming policy coverage, how much is it going to cost? And perhaps what parts of the policy, or even if there's multiple policies, which ones are going to trigger and which ones aren't, etc. So they're kind of working through that process, really. So they're asking for information. So information is having to flow through all the time to kind of feed that. And then, as I say, groundwater, Environment Agency, groundwater is about, giving that reassurance. Is there an immediate risk? Or, at the minute, it's under control. It doesn't look like chalk's being impacted. So therefore, there is no urgency in that regard. But it's a watching brief, essentially. And it's that journey, we've seen it all on this one so far.
All the stages.
Denial, definitely not our problem. Anger, who's doing this to me? Why have they done it? And then suddenly that awareness, and then the concern of, is it safe? And then the stress that, what's going to happen? And initially we don't have the ability to do those answers.
It takes a long time to get all the answers, doesn't it?
And you have to be honest with people at that moment in time to say, we need to do these steps to be able to then answer in some way the questions you're asking. But until we have that information, we can't do that. And you're making decisions. Your company and you, as a shareholder in that company, are making a lot of significant decisions based upon your judgment. Yes.
So is that covered under your professional indemnity insurance then?
If it was, if we made
if it was wrong, ended up it was wrong.
Yeah. And I think the key one for us, the golden rule is don't make it worse.
Absolutely.
That is, when we, and that is our, that's why we do the preparation. That's why we do the training. That's why we have the equipment we have and the people we have, is that, we don't make it worse. And we basically look to get up to speed as quickly as possible to get on top of it, control the situation, and then build a plan forward
Mm.
to make everything to return everything to back. I think, you know, we get people, you know, so we can become long-term friends in the short term, and then people very quickly forget about us when they're back to where they were. So
And actually, so if so, let's say I mean, presumably you've been managing this job on behalf of ASP, have you?
yes, I mean, we've more recently delegated a little bit, but definitely the
But
initial.
it's your bag in a sense. So
initial response.
other directors, do you sit down and sort of review other people's work, sort of peer review your assumptions?
I think we share and peer review, and we engage fairly significantly. And I guess this was all happening coming up to August. Now everybody goes on holiday in August, and I was in India for 2 weeks. So the reality is, it's about that. You know, we have a very open, collaborative system electronically within the teams. And so from the early stages, it was obvious that this was the job that was going to need to continue in my absence. So we had a kind of a lead and a shadow, and then ran that process, and then I disappeared and I was on a different time zone. So literally had no involvement for 2 weeks, came back and then picked it up the same way, really. So I think it's quite key that we can kind of go with that in that regard. So I think it's absolutely essential that we do work as a team, and we engage in that way. So it's just one of those ones. So I got a man waving at me on the other side of the window. I'm not quite sure why, but he's left now. But I think it's just,
you've got an Amazon delivery. That's what it is.
But it comes down to capacity, and in order to respond, I've always taken the view, and we've built it into our business model, that you have to have a little bit of extra capacity, and in order to give you that agility, and you have to have that little bit of extra capacity. No business can afford too much, but if you're going to be able to respond quickly to a job on the scale of this, you have to have that extra capacity, and you have to have the people then that you can trust, and who can work alongside and step up and then step back as and when needed. Really, it's just essential.
Yeah, good.
But yeah, so I think that kind of brings us to a conclusion and a little sneak preview of the next bit. This is
dramatic episode.
this is what we found when we exposed the pipe, basically. And if you look very carefully, you can see some holes in there. And I think Amy,
my God,
refers to it as the cheese grater. But
more to come on that.
And it's got a right angle bend in it as well, a direct right angle bend.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's got a just off that end of that right angle was an open-ended pipe, same diameter, that ran in the opposite, to the other angle of that. And it's not connected or anything like that. That's blanked off. But nobody knows where that pipe goes, or nobody knows why it was there, because apparently there was no other tank ever anywhere else. So you'll see
more to come in the next exciting episode.
But we confirmed the source, and that the leak is stopped, which is key. We've identified the mystery of the dark color. So kerosene with a little bit of bitumen. We think that's associated with the subsurface dressing, but we do need to still bottom out the risk to the building membrane. We've got oil within the surface water drainage removed, and the point of entry sealed, so no more oil getting into surface water, which is great. We've got it ventilated. The indoor air is all good and under cover. As you asked, Mark, policy insurance cover is confirmed. Waste streams are all set up now. Everybody's happy with what they are, and we've got scope and costs approved for the next stages, which was the mitigation and recovery moving forward, along with further delineation, etc. So that's episode 2.
Yeah.
Well, that is fantastic. So that's what it's going to be. That's great.
So there you go. And so that's pretty much at the end, that's what the picture that's there now is pretty much where we get to at the end of episode 2, really.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow. So
you
that
can
big
see the
circle thing,
large-
sorry, is that the pond?
Well, no, that's the you can just see the curvature of the fountain still.
Oh, it's a fountain.
Still
Oh, I
is.
didn't know there was a fountain. So where are the koi carp then?
They're around the back.
IBC somewhere on site then, or are they in the swimming pool?
They're around the back, Mark. So yeah, so you can't.
Around the back.
They're around
But
the
they're
back.
okay. They're okay.
They're okay. Don't worry. The koi carp are
Don't
fine.
worry.
So yeah. So I think it just highlights, that it's I guess in a period of 8 weeks, it moved from it's somebody else's problem to this.
Yeah.
And that's as you say, it can be quite I'm sure that the homeowners have kind of moved back to denial a number of times when they look out the window and see this going on.
Can't believe it's happening. It's a lovely drive, Adrian.
It
I
is.
hope you've got some lovely mates who can reinstate that as to be.
What are you trying to say, Mark?
No. I'm just not saying anything. I'm just saying it's a lovely drive.
We have some very good
Color matching. That is going to be, because you're going to have weathered bits and non-weathered bits.
Yeah, we've got a solution for that. It's
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. So thank you Amy. Thank you very much indeed. Adrian, thank you very much indeed.